This is part one of a three-part story. Let's start at the beginning. I didn't realize there were two kinds of silence until I was old enough to measure rooms by temperature. There was the silence of Sunday mornings at our house in Westchester, sunlight lying in tidy squares on the kitchen floor, my mother's slippers whispering across the tile, the kettle chirping like it was trying not to bother anyone. And then there was the silence that followed my father's compliments to my brother, a pause so bright it turned everything else to shadow. "That's my boy," Dad would say, and the air would warm around Ryan like a small summer. When he turned and looked at me, it wasn't cold so much as neutral, the way a bank teller looks at a stranger, polite, professional, proof that the building is climate-controlled. The street we lived on was a cul-de-sac where hydrangeas bloomed like gossip, where mailboxes were glossy and matched, where everyone knew the going price per square foot. In the evenings, you could see blue light on living room walls and silhouettes moving through kitchens, husbands uncorking bottles, wives unwrapping cheeses, children hovering like satellites. I didn't know any other way to be a family besides orbiting a center. In ours, the center had a cowlick and a gap-toothed grin and a name that meant Little King. Ryan. He arrived when I was 3.5 and somehow managed to be both the youngest and the eldest, in that he set the weather for the rest of us. If he laughed, our house was spring. If he cried, thunder. If he was bored, my mother found activities. If he was tired, everyone spoke softer. Later, he would claim not to remember any of this, that he wasn't aware of the stage built under his feet. I believe him. Children can't see the tricks the spotlight plays on the rest of the room. The earliest memory that feels like a memory and not a photograph happened on my 6th birthday. There was a cake with my name in cursive and sugar roses my mother said were tasteful, not gaudy. The adults stood in a bright ring and sang politely, the way people sing when they are also admiring the table settings. I made a wish I can't recall and blew out the candles. Before the smoke had thinned, Ryan 2.5, in a sweater vest, plunged both hands into the cake like a diver into shallow water. For a second, everyone gasped. Then they laughed. My mother swooped in to kiss his cheeks and scold the mess in a voice that was all meringue and no lemon. My father called him a character. Someone said, "He keeps us young." I stood there with frosting on my dress and the wish still stuck in my throat. When I started to cry, my mother dabbed at my face with a napkin as if wiping sauce from the edge of a plate. "Honey," she murmured, not unkindly, "it's just cake." "You're the big sister," set a good example. I learned things from that afternoon that no one meant to teach me. One was that ruin could be rebranded as charm if the right person caused it. Another was that disappointment was a private practice, something you did quietly, like prayer. Uncle Martin began visiting around then. He was my father's older brother by 6 years and, to hear my parents tell it, an accountant because he lacked imagination. "He likes numbers because they don't talk back," my father would say, chuckling the way men chuckle when a joke is also an alibi. I liked Martin because he listened the way people listen when they can't afford to miss a detail. He'd sit at our kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug, as if warming them on a campfire only he could see. He wasn't handsome in the way my father was, no shine, no salesman's polish, but there was a calm about him that made me breathe slower. He had an expression he used when the room was noisy, a tiny upward flinch at one corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, more a sign that he had found his own silence and was content there. He never arrived with large gifts or dazzled anyone with stories of travel. He brought brown paper bags with bakery labels and napkins neatly folded in his pocket. "Claire," he'd say, like my name was a place we were both trying to get to, "tell me what you're reading." Or, "What's the most interesting thing you learned this week?" If Ryan burst in and began a performance jokes, bonus facts he'd plucked from YouTube, Martin gave him a generous hearing and then, unhurriedly, returned to me. It wasn't a snub. It was a redistribution of attention, as if his gaze could weigh things and knew where to set itself down. Once, after dinner, he asked me to fetch a deck of cards. He spread them on the table, hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades. "What do you see?" he asked. I said I saw colors and shapes. He shook his head. "You see stories," he said. "These are companies, these are profits, these are losses, these are the problems you don't plan for." He moved the cards into tidy columns. Most people think money is a wall. They stack it high and hide behind it. But it's a mirror, Claire. It shows you what you love and how you behave when you can afford to be yourself. I didn't fully understand, but I liked the way it sounded like the rules of a game that could be learned. There were other lessons, though no one named them that way. When I was 8 and Ryan 5, we both signed up for swim lessons. I sank like a coin, legs scissoring, eyes stinging. Ryan paddled on the surface, flapping like a flag. At the end of the class, the instructor handed out ribbons. Ryan said most improved. Mine said attendance. On the ride home, my father held the steering wheel like it was a prop he was very good at using. "Buddy," he told my brother, "you keep at it, you'll be a natural." He glanced in the rear view. "Claire, don't overthink. That's your problem." At dinner, my mother told the story to Uncle Martin with all the voices and pauses of a practice bit. "She's so in her head," she said, patting my wrist. "If she'd loosen up and smile more, she'd be unstoppable." Martin listened, then turned to me. "How did you breathe?" he asked. I blinked. "What?" "In the pool." "Through your mouth? Nose? Did you count? Did you feel your lungs get tight?" I told him I took breath like a thief, quickly, guiltily, as if I were stealing something from the water. He nodded. "Next time measure. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe." Not because the ribbon matters. Because comfort does. He didn't offer praise. He offered strategy. It felt like being taken seriously, which in our house was rare enough to be mistaken for love. The years arranged themselves into a sensible pattern, my father traveling during the week and returning with a restless energy that made every room feel too small, my mother producing gatherings like a hostessing machine, Ryan trying on interests like shirts. Soccer, piano, debate, robotics, whatever he touched generated applause, even if the applause was mostly preliminary. "He just has that spark," neighbors would say, as if lighting matches was an achievement. They weren't wrong. He was easy to like. He made eye contact, remembered names, and laughed with his whole face. I don't mean he was cruel. He just lived under a sun the rest of us could feel from a distance. I don't know if my parents loved me less, only that they loved me in the conditional tense. If you keep this up, you could, if you put yourself out there more, then if you didn't worry so much love as a contract with terms and a renewal date. I tried to be responsible about it the way I was responsible about homework, church, getting the good towels when guests came. I ironed my approval-seeking flat and stored it in a drawer. Uncle Martin didn't ask for performances. He took me to the park across from his condo where old men played chess as if the rest of life were a sidebar. We'd split a cinnamon bun, and he'd open the newspaper to the business section, only to fold it closed without reading. "Nothing in there that can't wait a day," he'd say. "Tell me about your science project." When I turned 10, he handed me a small blue box with a tarnished ribbon. Inside was a silver dollar from 1922, the face rubbed soft by other people's handling. "For when you feel unseen," he said. A reminder that worth doesn't fade. It accumulates differently. I kept it in the back pocket of my jeans until my mother asked whether I thought I was a boy. Then I hid it under my pillow, and later in a porcelain dish in my dresser, and later still in the zippered pouch of my wallet, where it would whisper to me every time I paid for something: measure, not perform. Breathe, not beg. Middle school is a museum where every insecurity is put under bright light. Westchester did its best to make adolescence appear curated, matching team jackets, orthodontic perfection, school concerts with brochures. I auditioned for a spring play and landed in the chorus. Ryan, in 6th grade, was given a speaking role. Natural presence, the theater teacher told my mother. "He knows how to take a room." The night of the performance, my mother pinned my hair so tightly I had a headache, then told me to smile with my eyes because the audience couldn't hear me. Afterward, everyone toasted Ryan at Applebee's while I drank a chocolate milkshake like a consolation prize. It wasn't the smallness of my part that bothered me. It was how efficiently my family mistook volume for value. A thing you could hear was apparently a thing you should. I snuck outside and phoned Martin from the parking lot. "Do you ever feel like you're supposed to clap for the wrong things?" I asked. He paused. I could hear the clock in his kitchen, steady as a metronome. "Often," he said. but we get to choose what we admire in private. That's where character sits. Character doesn't get flowers, I said. No, he agreed. But it gets a bed that sleeps well. When I was 15, my father lost a client and the house tightened like a belt. My mother started cutting coupons with a zeal that looked like faith. Ryan made a series of speeches about his startup ideas, apps that solved problems no one had, services for dog walkers who didn't like dogs, and my parents treated each pitch like a college acceptance. I got a part-time job shelving books at the library. It wasn't noble. It was quiet work with rules I could abide by. The stacks smelled like paper and patience. On slow afternoons, I'd read a chapter at the end of an aisle, 1 foot on the lower rung of the ladder, my body making a check mark against the shelves. I brought home novels with muted covers and essays that used the word ethics without blushing. When I handed my mother my first paycheck to contribute, she hesitated like I had offered a delicate fish. "Are you sure, honey?" she asked, and before I could answer, added, "You know, Ryan's saving for a car. Isn't that sweet? He's so independent." I nodded and folded my money into an envelope with his name on it, because I had learned that sometimes the only way to end a conversation is with an action that looks generous from a distance. Uncle Martin found out and said nothing for a long time. We were at his dining table, where the placemats were tidy and the centerpiece was a bowl of lemons that looked like a lifestyle magazine's idea of truth. "You don't have to buy your way into approval," he said finally. "I'm not," I lied. "I'm helping." He set his fork down. "Help is best when it doesn't erase you." Senior year offered the illusion of fresh air, SATs, college visits, the promise of a new city with streets that didn't know our family's choreography. I applied to schools with marketing programs because I liked the way language shifted people without their noticing. My mother approved in a way that sounded like branding. "A practical field," she said, patting my shoulder as if I were a brochure. Ryan, a sophomore, had a YouTube channel where he reviewed gadgets he mostly borrowed. He spoke into the camera like it was a person who owed him money, all charm and eye contact. Companies started sending him things: drones, headphones, tiny projectors, and my parents began to talk about his entrepreneurial spirit the way other parents said grades. I got into 3 schools and chose the one with a campus that smelled like rain and ambition. At the celebratory dinner, my father raised a glass and said, "To Claire, may she find her voice," as if the search were an elective. My mother smiled, then segued into a story about the admissions officer who had complimented Ryan's handshake. After dessert, I slipped outside and sat on the stoop with the silver dollar pressed to my palm. I didn't wish exactly. I counted breaths. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. College was a relief in the way leaving a noisy room is a relief. The dorms were messy, the lectures large, but the rules were different. No one knew my brother, and my value didn't arrive prepackaged. I learned how to write a copy that read like a compliment, how to design pitches that made executives feel like they'd come up with the idea themselves. I studied late and slept badly and ate too much cereal at midnight and didn't mind because the work was mine. Uncle Martin emailed once a week. His messages were short and factual, like letters from a sensible general. "Do you need anything?" was his refrain. I always said no. He came down on weekends sometimes with a bag of bagels and a quiet pride that warmed the room without boasting. We'd walk the perimeter of campus, and he'd ask questions with the patience of someone winding a clock. "What did you learn that felt like a new language?" he'd ask. Or, "Who showed you grace this week?" When I told him about a professor who had praised my ad campaign, he said, "Good. Save the brief. You'll need it to remember this isn't an accident." During winter break of my junior year, Ryan launched an e-commerce site that sold sustainably sourced water bottles with inspirational phrases etched into the side. "People love ethics if you make it shiny," he told me, handing me a prototype that said, "Own your morning." The site crashed on the first day because too many of his followers visited at once. My parents toasted with the good champagne. "Our boy," my father said, beaming. Always thinking bigger. Uncle Martin sat beside me on the couch and did his almost smile. "Shiny is heavy," he murmured. "It scratches easily." The spring I graduated, the economy was jittery but hiring. I got an entry-level job at a boutique marketing firm in the city that specialized in humanizing financial brands, which meant turning numbers into bedtime stories for adults who needed to sleep at night. I found an apartment in Yonkers with bird-loud mornings and a neighbor who watered her plants like they were confidants. I bought a couch that was too big for the space and sat on the floor for a week before I figured out how to angle it. My parents came to see the place and did a tour that was part inspection, part performance. "So cute," my mother said, as if describing a puppy in a sweater. "Temporary, of course," my father added. "You'll outgrow it soon." Uncle Martin arrived later by himself with a houseplant and a toolkit. He fixed a cabinet door without being asked and showed me how to anchor a bookshelf so it wouldn't tilt. We ate Chinese takeout on the big couch, cartons balanced on our knees. During a commercial, he stared at the blank space above the mantel. "What would you like to see every day?" he asked. "Something true," I said, not sure what I meant. He nodded. "Don't rush. Rooms tell you what they want if you listen." When he left, he pressed an envelope into my hand. It was a card in his neat script. "Proud of you for building your life," like a ledger attention to both sides. There was a check tucked inside for an amount that made me want to argue. I didn't. I put it in a savings account and named it after. The last time I saw him before everything tilted was a Saturday in early October. The air had that slant of light that makes even errands feel cinematic. He'd come down to have coffee and help me compare interest rates on a certificate of deposit because I trusted his way of making choices. Not flashy, not slow, patient as a mason. We sat at my small table, spreadsheets spread like placemats, pens aligned, the houseplant thriving in the corner like proof that life could continue without being dramatic. He asked about work. I told him about a client who said they wanted fewer words and more meaning. He nodded, a common disease. He asked about men. I said I was dating my job. He tilted his head. "Jobs don't cook. Remember to feed yourself." Before he left, he walked to the window and looked down at the street, a dog dragging a man toward a tree, a delivery truck double parked, a woman in a red coat moving like a confident sentence. "I like it," he said. "Your life looks honest from here." He hugged me, one arm, brief, as if affection were a precious resource to be measured rather than a faucet to be left running. "Call me if your shelf tilts," he said, "and then, keep the coin where you can find it." He died 2 weeks later. A stroke in his sleep, the kind the body conducts without rehearsal. My father called from the driveway of my parents' house because he didn't want to say the words in their kitchen. "Claire," he said, "Martin's gone." His voice had the crispness of a pressed shirt. "Come home. We're handling arrangements." Grief arrived as a fog and then as a knife. I stood in my small bathroom with both hands on the sink and let the mirror hold me because I couldn't hold myself. I pressed the silver dollar to my sternum until the cold became a kind of anchor. I put on a black dress that felt like it belonged to someone who understood how to grieve properly and took the train north. Outside the window, the river moved with its usual indifference, barges shouldering purpose, trees performing the season as if anyone's heart were not breaking. At my parents' house, the hydrangeas were browning, the lawn trimmed to the inch, everything as it should be for a family that had mastered appearances. My mother hugged me the way people hug in doorways when there are casseroles to manage. My father shook my shoulder like a coach. Ryan stood in the foyer and looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen since we were little. "I'm sorry," he said, and I believed him. The funeral was small, dignified, the hymns slow enough to be instructive. People from Martin's firm came in conservative suits that made them look interchangeable. A neighbor from his condo association spoke about how he always brought a paper bag of pastries to meetings and insisted on fairness in the landscaping budget. An elderly woman from the library said he paid his fines even when the librarian told him not to bother. None of it sounded grand, all of it sounded like him. Afterward, there was coffee and formality at a funeral home that smelled like professionalism. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, gray-haired, unhurried, approached my father with a manila folder. "We should meet briefly," he said. Mr. Price left clear instructions. My mother checked her watch the way people check their reflection. "Can this wait until after we've eaten?" she asked. Mr. Peterson's expression didn't move. "It would be best to do it now." We filed into a small conference room with chairs that had opinions about posture. The window faced a parking lot where leaves skittered like decisions. Mr. Peterson opened his folder and removed a document that was thick enough to be both will and map. My parents sat side by side, bodies held in a practiced parallel. Ryan took a seat near the corner and fidgeted with his tie. I chose the chair slightly off-center, the position I had trained in all my life. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat with the modest authority of a man who only says a thing once. Your brother, he began, looking at my father, was very specific. He left personal bequests, books, some keepsakes to colleagues and a few friends. The residue of his estate, his home, investments, and savings are to be bequeathed in full to his niece. He turned his head and met my eyes. To Claire. The room made a sound I can only describe as a collective recalculation. My mother's mouth opened and then disciplined itself shut. My father's jaw made a small movement I had seen him reserve for bad news that could be turned into a sales angle. Ryan blinked as if someone had taken a flash photo. I heard my own breath, measured, the way you count when you want the air to behave. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Mr. Peterson continued in the same level tone that had delivered every other sentence. He described Claire as the closest thing to a daughter I've had and stated that she has consistently demonstrated integrity, humility, and prudence. My mother found her voice. It sounded like crystal tapping a glass. Surely, she said, Martin intended for family to share. Mr. Peterson's eyes were kind but spare. He intended for Claire to decide what to do and for no one to force her hand. Silence again, but this time it wasn't neutral. It had weight. It settled in corners and reached across the table like fog reaching for water. I felt the coin in my wallet press against my ribs as if to say, anchor here. I looked at my parents. Their faces were portraits I knew well, my father recalibrating, my mother arranging dignity like a scarf. Ryan was watching me with something like fear or hope, I couldn't tell which. I thought of Uncle Martin at my tiny table, asking what truth I wanted to look at every day. The answer had always been the same. Worth, not applause. Breath, not performance. Measure, then move. Thank you, I said to Mr. Peterson, my voice steadier than the rest of me. I understand. The car ride home was a study in choreography, seatbelt snapping, doors closing too hard, my mother's perfume cutting through the hush like a threat wrapped in lilacs. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. The highway hummed beneath us, the kind of steady noise that could almost pass for calm if you didn't look at our faces. At a red light, my father said, "We'll straighten this out," as though the will were a misplaced invoice. My mother's hand fluttered toward his arm. "She's just overwhelmed," she said, eyes fixed on the windshield. I opened my mouth and closed it again. There was nothing to say that wouldn't become evidence later. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light came on automatically obedient, punctual, oblivious. Ryan lingered behind as our parents went inside. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I said. He nodded, scuffing his shoe against the curb. "They'll calm down. Eventually." The word eventually sounded like a prayer that knew it wouldn't be answered. Inside, my mother went straight for the kitchen, the battlefield she understood. Drawers opened and closed. Glass clinked against glass. "We'll have tea," she announced, the way generals announce regrouping. "We'll discuss sensibly." My father stood by the window, phone in hand, scrolling through something invisible. "Martin was sentimental," he said. "He always overestimated you." The sentence landed softly, like a knife with the blade wrapped. "I think he knew exactly what he was doing," I said. My mother turned, kettle forgotten. "Claire, be reasonable. You can't want this to divide us." "I didn't ask for it," I said. "Then prove it," my father snapped. "Share it. We'll manage it properly." He said manage the way people say control. Ryan cleared his throat. "Maybe let's not. Stay out of this," my mother said without looking at him. The kettle began to shriek. None of us moved. That night I lay awake in my old bedroom, the walls still painted a pink I'd outgrown. The air smelled of furniture polish and nostalgia turned sour. Downstairs, the murmur of my parents' voices rose and fell like tides hitting a seawall. Every few minutes, my name surfaced, flattened, disappeared again. At 2 a.m., I packed quietly and drove back to Yonkers. The parkway was empty, the radio whispering ads for miracle mattresses and law firms that fought for you. I thought of Uncle Martin's voice, measure, not perform. It felt like instruction now, not comfort. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes swollen, hair unmade, but underneath it a steadiness I hadn't noticed before. Grief had burned away the need to please. For a week, nothing. Then the calls began. My father's first was brisk, businesslike. Claire, we've reviewed the documents. There's a lot to sort out. Best if you transfer administration to us temporarily. No, I said. He exhaled, disappointed but unsurprised. You're not equipped for this kind of responsibility. I'll learn. A pause. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Then the line clicked dead. My mother's messages came next, a daily rotation of guilt and prayer. Family should share blessings. Your brother's business could flourish with just a portion. God tests us through temptation. I stopped listening after the fifth one. Ryan showed up at my apartment 2 weeks later with grocery bags and an uncertain smile. Mom thinks you're starving, he said. Starving for what? He shrugged. Peace, maybe. He set the bags down. They're freaking out, you know. Dad says he might contest the will. On what grounds? That Martin was manipulated. I laughed. By me? Yeah. He grimaced. I told them that's ridiculous. Thank you. He looked at me for a long moment. They're scared, he said finally. Not about money, about control. You broke the script. That night, after he left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the checkbook, the figures suddenly heavier than numbers should be. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was proof that someone had chosen me when it wasn't convenient to do so. And that, apparently, was unforgivable. By early spring, the pressure shifted from words to paperwork. Thick envelopes arrived with polite stationery, advisory proposals, family asset consolidation plan. Each contained neatly typed lines assigning me the role of transferor and my parents as trustees. The language was syrupy with good intentions. At the bottom of one, a notary seal shimmered faintly. I stared at it until the letters blurred. The signature above my printed name looked almost perfect except it wasn't mine. My hands went cold. The air in the apartment tilted. For a moment, I couldn't tell if I wanted to cry or vomit. Instead, I drove. The house looked the same, paint immaculate, lawn rehearsed. My mother opened the door mid-knock, her smile brittle. Claire, sweetheart. We were just. I held up the document. Who signed my name? Color drained from her face, then returned in a flush. Let's not dramatize. Did you do it? Your father handled the details, she said, stepping aside. He was in the living room, a legal pad on his knee. Martin would have wanted efficiency, he began. You forged my signature, I said. Temporarily, he corrected. For processing. That's a felony. Don't be ridiculous. Families resolve things internally. Not this one, I said. Ryan appeared on the stairs, barefoot, alarmed. Dad, what? Go back upstairs, my father ordered. Ryan came down instead. He took the paper from me, read, and his jaw tightened. You can't do this. Watch your tone, my mother hissed. No, Mom. This is fraud. The word hung there, enormous. My father's expression cracked into something ugly. You ungrateful. I didn't wait for the rest. If you file this, I'll go to the police. And for the first time in my life, they looked at me as if I were capable of something. This was part 1 of a 3-part story. In part 2, everything changes and the situation becomes more than just family tension. I'll see you in part 2.